Hi everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a great week and some good rest. Today we're going to focus on the Dash Bootstrap collapse component. The collapse component is what allows you to hide or unhide certain elements in a page. It's typically used in questions and answers or any dashboard that has a lot of graphs and a lot of things that you want to hide so it doesn't overwhelm the page for the user. Let's see some examples. Here you have on Yelp, you have review highlights of a certain restaurant. If you go to show more highlights, it will show 2 more highlights. So just by default, it's just showing 3 highlights. Here in a dashboard that was built by Power BI, if we make this larger, about the English Premier League, if you go into this collapse, you click on it, it will have inside the collapse, it will have radio items. If you click on radio items, it will change the graph. So they chose to put the radio items, just to put the logo here, and the radio items hidden inside this collapse. So this is how collapse is typically used. You would also see it on like big dashboards that have a lot of information, but you don't want to give all the information to the user because it will just be too much. It'll just be too much scrolling up and down and too much on the web page. So they'll choose to hide certain graphs, and if the user wants to open a graph, they can open it. Here the user has the option to open a strip chart. Here the user has an option to open a histogram or close a histogram, and the same thing with a pie chart. So this is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to see the code and learn how to code this collapse with frequently asked questions, and we're going to learn how to code this collapse with a graph inside the Bootstrap collapse function. All this information is taken and is based off of the collapse component inside Dash Bootstrap. So it's this web page. Just go in the link below the video, open this up, and you'll see all this information that is very useful. You can read about the keywords as well that can help you better understand the component. Lastly, I just want to thank my Patreon community. Thank you for expressing interest in the collapse component. This video is dedicated to you. If anybody else is interested in joining my Patreon community, it's the first link under the video. Go ahead and check it out. I'll be very much appreciative. All right, let's get started. Make sure to download the code below the video and place it inside your Python IDE, like whatever PyCharm I'm using, but you can use Spider or whatever Python IDE, and just run the script so you can have this loaded and we can work on this together. It'll be a lot easier to follow if you do it that way. Okay, so the first couple of libraries we want to import are these libraries. If you don't have them, all you have to do is pip in your terminal, pip install dash, and within 5 minutes you will have access to all of this. Oh, you also have to pip install dash bootstrap components for this to work. Then we're going to initiate our app this way, and you have to make sure that you have this external sheets. You have some kind of theme inside this dash, because without this, your app will not work. You need a Bootstrap theme. I chose Lumen. You can click on this link, and you can choose other themes from here. You see themes, Lumen, you can choose any other themes. Just make sure to capitalize it so it's all uppercase letters. Play around with it. They have really cool themes. Then we're going to start our layout. So our layout obviously is going to go inside a div, and then let us see this together. So here is our, inside of the first div, we have our header, which is the product that we're selling, product of a beautiful pizza for $99. Expensive, but it actually is a very good pizza, so I recommend buying it from whoever sells it. And then we have a horizontal line right here, you see. And then we have our card header. We're going to put our button inside the card header. You don't have to put the card header. You can actually take this out, but it looks neat. When you have the card header, all of this is gray and it takes up the whole row, so it looks like I like it more, so I put it inside a card header. And then we put the button, the dbc.button, dash bootstrap component button, with the text right here that you can see right here. The link color is that bluish color that you see, and we have to give it an ID because we are going to use this ID below in the callback to connect the button with the collapse here below. So here, this is the component that we're learning about, the dbc.collapse. So open the parentheses, and inside you can put anything you want. We're going to put a graph in a few more minutes when we go over the graph section of the tutorial. Here we put just a regular car body text, but you can put inside the car body, you can put also a checklist or radio item, whatever you want. So here we're going to put just text, which is going to be the answer for our question, and close the car body, and then give some properties or define some properties for our collapse. So the collapse ID is going to be collapse question 1, and this is the most important part. This is the is open property. So this tells the app if the collapse is going to be open or not open, hidden or not hidden. So because is open is false, right now it is hidden, so you cannot see it when you refresh the page because is open is false. We do the exact same thing here. We pretty much just copy pasted this and just put it under here, and we just changed the answer string, and we just changed the button question, right? So it's does it have extra cheese? Does it have extra cheese? So for each one of these sets, button and collapse, I create a callback. So this will be the first callback for the button question 1 and collapse question 1 set, and this will be the second callback for the second set. All right, so remember, the callbacks is what you need in order to connect the information. If you do not have a callback, you won't be able to click on this. You can click on the button, but it won't do anything. You see, I'm clicking on this, I'm clicking on it, it doesn't do anything. You need the callback to connect all this information together and to create an interactive element into your dashboard. All right, so let's see the callback. I'm not going to go deep into the callback because my last tutorial on Saturday here in the video above talks all about the callback and the difference between output, input, and state. So just make sure to see that video because it's very, very important for you to create interactive dashboards in Dash. All right, so the first thing we're going to do inside this callback, we're going to take the input and the state. So we're going to have 2 arguments inside the function, but the input is going to be the end clicks. This pertains to the button. So the button question 1 is right here. This is the ID of the button question 1. So it takes the end clicks of the end of the button, which is a property to count the number of times the button was clicked. And it also takes from the collapse ID, the collapse component, it will take the is open property. So this is the same thing as saying false, but obviously we want this to be interactive, so we'll just take the property is open and we take them inside the function. And then we're going to say, if the button was clicked, do something. If not, just return is open. I'm returning this, as you probably know by now, into right here, the output. Anything you return in the function goes into the output. So I'm going to return is open, which actually returns false. Why is it returning false? Because it's taken the state of the collapse question 1 component. Collapse question 1 ID belongs to the collapse component, and the is open state is false. So right now, this here is false, and I'm saying if no button is clicked, meaning when the page just loads for the first time or refreshes, if no button is clicked, then return is open, which is false. So it's going to be hidden. But if the button is clicked, then I'm going to return the opposite of false, not false, or the opposite of is open. So let's take a look. If I click on this, I'm returning the opposite of is false, which is true. So I'm seeing what the text inside the collapse. But now the state is true. So if I click on the button again for the second time, I'm going to return the opposite of true. So if I click on the button again, the opposite of true will be false. So this will be hidden. And that's it. This is all you need to know about the callback in order to make this work. Again, if you need a refresher about the state or the input, just look into the video above and you can learn more about the callback. This callback does exactly the same as the first one, but it takes the second button, and it takes the state and the output of the second collapse to do the exact same thing. So if we click on this, we'll have the answer of why if the pizza has extra cheese. And if we click on it again, it's hidden, just like in Amazon or Yelp or many other websites that have reviews and want to hide certain elements of their graph. All right, so this was the first questions and answers. Now let's see how we can do this. How we can create a dashboard where some of the, well, in this case, all of the graphs are hidden by default. But once you know this, you can create other dashboards where some graphs are open and are always on the page, and some graphs are actually hidden and can be chosen by the user. This data is taken from a girl coding on Kaggle, and it's data on space missions, all the space missions that happened in space, and their costs. I think we're going to analyze here their costs, right? How much they cost, and how many was a success, how many were a failure, and all that. Again, that's below the video, so make sure you open the link below the video and put your CSV document, this data, into the same folder as you put this .py file. Sorry. All right. So obviously we're importing all the necessary libraries. We're reading the CSV into a data frame, and then we're just going to say take out the rows that have pre-launch failure because there are only like 4 rows, so I just took them out. Start the app with the Lumen theme. Or whatever theme you want. And now we're going to create 3 different buttons. But here, one second, here the difference is I'm going to define, here you go. Here I'm going to define rows. Here I want to make sure that everything, all the buttons are in one Bootstrap component row, and all the graphs are in another row. All right, so that's why I created the DBC row here. You can learn more about the DBC, the row or the columns, and how to put things in different rows and columns from my the video above on the introduction to the Dash Bootstrap layout or styling. So I put everything inside a row. But what's going to go inside this row? This row is going to have a list comprehension. This one's going to have a list comprehension of 3 buttons. So I'm going to say for graph, and for each one of these graphs, create 3 buttons, 3 dbc.button, and each button is going to, well, the first button is going to say open py because this graph is py. The second button is going to say open hist, and open strip, the third button. Same thing with the ID. The ID has to be different. You can't have 3 buttons with the same ID because that's a big no-no in Dash. So this first button ID is going to be button dash py. The second button is going to be button dash hist, and so on until, well, I guess until strip. And so that's how I use the list comprehension and create 3 buttons instead of copy and pasting this 3 times. And then I'm going to justify center. This is a property for the row, which means that everything is going to go in the center right here and not to the left. All right, so we got the buttons. Now we're going to go into the graphs. So important to make note of the fact that the DBC row we're opening another row here that's going to contain all the graphs. But inside the row, I'm going to have 3 Bootstrap columns, right? And this column is going to be 4 columns wide. This column component is going to be 4 columns wide. This column component is going to be 4 columns wide, and the same thing with this. Very important to make note that the DBC collapse goes inside the column, right? This is contained inside the column. Don't do DBC collapse and then the DBC column, because that's not going to work. You got to put the DBC collapse inside the column component. All right, so we have the second row here, and we have 3 different column components, 4 width each one, which gives us this 4 width, and a width of 4. And then all we have to do is we define the graph. So we actually put the graph inside the collapse, and we actually created the Plotly expressed pie chart already inside this graph and inside this collapse. So this graph actually exists. If I load the page and I refresh it, all these graphs are actually in here. They're just hidden. All right. This is not a dynamic callback. They're actually in here, but they're only hidden. And why are they hidden? Again, because like we saw last time, because is open is false. Is open and ID belong to the collapse component. You see the graph closes here, there's nothing, and then we have the ID collapse pi is the ID of this first collapse component, and is open is false. Same thing here, collapse hist is the ID of this collapse, and is open is false. So very similarly to what I did in the 10 minutes ago, we create 3 different callback functions and decorators that will refer to each button and collapse. So this first callback is going to refer to the button pi and the collapse pi component, or the collapse component with the pi ID, and the second one will refer to the histogram, and the third one will refer to the strip. So I'm doing really exactly the same thing. I'm just taking the button and the state of the collapse component, and I'm just saying if no button was clicked, just return false, because by default this is false. And if a button is clicked, just return the opposite of the current state. The opposite of the current state of pi is true. And if I click again, the opposite of the current true is false. So this is what this thing does right here. All right. So again, I want to highlight, make sure that your collapse components are inside columns and inside the rows. They are wrapped by the columns and rows and not outside of them. And another thing to point out, in many different Dash tutorials that I made, you'll see that I often tie the callback to the graph ID to create the graph. We're not creating a graph here. The graph is already created, so this ID doesn't really matter right now because we're not tying this ID to anything. You need it, but it doesn't really matter. If you want to manipulate the graph, you have to create another callback to manipulate the ID of the graph if you want. But this graph is set and is inside the collapse function. Now, I created 3 callbacks. But if you have many graphs, or you have many different questions and answers, or many different questions and then answers that you want to hide, it's a lot easier if you use a list comprehension inside your callback. So I'm not going to put this in the tutorial because this uses a dash callback triggered. And I didn't teach about that yet, so I don't want to confuse you, my viewers. But just if you know how to use it triggered, then instead of using 3 different callbacks for each graph, for each collapse and button component, you can just put all 3 of them inside one callback with a list comprehension. Right? You do for I in range 1, 2, 3, and so you have 3 states, 3 inputs and 3 outputs in this list comprehension, and then you just note how to use a triggered in order to tell the app what button was triggered to be able to open or hide or unhide the collapse component. All right, so take a look, read more about this here. If you have any questions about this, go into the under the YouTube video and go into the comments. Just ask me any question you have. I'll be happy to help you and try to answer these questions. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this was helpful. Again, thank you my Patreon community for showing interest. This video is dedicated to you. Keep practicing. Never give up, and always remember we're better together, so we'll help each other out. Have a good day, and I'll see you next week.